They had the boy cornered before the sun even finished rising. One white man with a whip on his hip, two dogs on a short chain, and a body in the dirt like it was a sack of spoiled grain. No prayers, no time, just orders. And if the boy said the wrong thing or looked the wrong way, he wasn't walking back. That's how the game starts when your life belongs to somebody else. No rules, no mercy, only moves. The place they took him to wasn't a graveyard, not officially. It was just land the plantation didn't use. A stretch of woods that felt off. The kind of ground that makes your chest tighten like you stepped into a room where a deal is being made without you. Trees leaned like they were listening. Brush grew in ugly patches, thick where it shouldn't be, bare where it should have covered you. Even the animals knew better. No birds nesting, no deer wandering, just the occasional fox cutting through fast, head low like it owed somebody money. Folks in the quarters didn't talk about that patch of woods out loud. They didn't have to. Everybody had felt it, that quiet weight, that warning. But the boy Isaiah, he didn't get the choice to avoid it. He was 7, small enough to fit where grown men couldn't. That's what they used him for, crawl under porches, reach into gaps, dig in tight spots. The kind of work that keeps a child close to the ground and far from hope. He was in the middle of a morning task when the overseer came looking for him, not the old one. This was the younger kind, the nephew type, the one who acts like cruelty is his birthright. He didn't ask, he pointed. Boy. Now, Isaiah's grandmother, Mama Tess, didn't move fast, but her eyes did. She understood danger the way old folks do, not as a moment, but as a pattern. He got work in the barn, she tried, careful with her words like she was stepping across glass. The overseer barely looked at her. Not today. Then he smiled like he'd already won. Got something needs handling. Handling, that's what they called it when they didn't want to say what it really was. Mama Tess didn't beg. Begging feeds men like that. She did something quieter, something the overseer didn't catch. Isaiah stepped close and kissed her hand, soft as breath. Their private signal, the one you use when you don't trust the world to give you another chance. Then he followed. They walked past the big house where everything was painted clean like paint could hide blood, past the machines chewing cotton like teeth, past the barns where the air stayed sweet while the people stayed bitter. The overseer didn't speak much. He didn't have to. Silence was part of his power. Silence said, I can do this without explaining because you can't stop me. Isaiah kept his eyes forward, but inside he was counting. Every step away from the quarters was one less step toward safety. They reached the edge where the plantation stopped pretending to be civilized and the woods took over. The path thinned, the light changed, and there it was, a clearing, not wide, just enough space for what they came to do. On the ground lay a shape wrapped in stained canvas. The kind of wrap you use when you don't want to see what you've done. The kind of wrap that turns a person into an object. The overseer nodded at it like he was identifying broken equipment. Old one, name was Peter. He said it like it didn't matter, like names were for white mouths only. Caught fever, dropped last night. Isaiah stared at that wrapped form. He knew Peter. Peter used to carve little things when nobody was watching. Tiny animals, little birds, a horse small enough to hide in a child's palm. Peter had given Isaiah one of those once, quick and secret, like he was passing down a piece of freedom. Now Peter was on the ground, wrapped up and waiting, and the overseer's voice stayed cold. We don't leave him out here. I'll get him. Or worse, folks'll start thinking too much. Thinking was dangerous on that land, mourning even more so. They didn't mind the dead. They minded the living remembering. Then the overseer handed Isaiah a small spade, child-sized, worn down from use, meaning Isaiah wasn't the first kid they'd used this way. Dig. He pointed beneath a twisted oak that looked like it had been struck by hard weather and never healed. Long, narrow, deep as you can, and listen close, boy. The overseer stepped nearer, voice dropping. This don't leave your mouth, not in the quarters, not to the women, not to nobody. Isaiah swallowed, his throat was dry. Yes, sir. The overseer leaned back like he'd finished his business, like this was no different than chopping wood. Then he walked away, just like that. Left a child alone with a body and a shovel and the kind of silence that eats at you. Isaiah stood there a long moment, not moving, not breathing right. The woods held him like a closed fist. He looked at the canvas again. Under it was a man who had laughed once. A man who had hands that made things instead of breaking them. A man who had survived years of work and hunger and heat and threats, just to die without even getting his name spoken with respect. That's when Isaiah understood something at 7 years old most men never learn. On that plantation, death wasn't the end of cruelty. It was just when cruelty stopped needing an audience. He started digging. The ground didn't welcome the blade. Roots ran thick like veins, gripping the dirt like they owned it. He had to hack and twist and pry. Dirt got under his nails and the cuts on his hands. The handle rubbed his palms raw fast. By the time the sun climbed, his skin was hot and his back was already aching the way a grown man aches after a hard day. But he kept digging because he knew what stopping meant. Stopping meant the overseer came back angry. Angry men don't need reasons. Hours passed. No water, no food, no one checking. That told Isaiah everything about Peter's value to them. Not even worth the time it took to watch. The only company he had was the wrapped body and the whisper of leaves. And in that quiet, Isaiah's mind started doing what sharp minds do when they're trapped. It started asking questions. Not big questions. Dangerous questions. Where did Peter come from before this place took him? What was his name before they stamped Peter on him like a tag? Who loved him before the world made loving illegal? Isaiah didn't have the answers, but the questions stuck to him like mud. By late afternoon, the hole was there, not perfect. One side fought him with a stubborn root that wouldn't surrender, but it was deep enough to do what they wanted. Isaiah climbed out slowly, legs shaking, sweat drying into salt on his skin. He looked at the body again. In a different world, someone would have gathered. Someone would have spoken words. Someone would have made sure Peter left this life like he mattered. But on that land, the dead didn't get words. So Isaiah made his own. He peeled back a corner of the canvas, just enough to see Peter's face. Death had taken the warmth but not the shape of him. Eyes closed, mouth relaxed, not fear, not peace, just finished. Isaiah reached into his pocket, his fingers found the little carved horse. Smooth wood worn from being held in secret. He'd kept it like a lucky charm, like proof that kindness still existed somewhere. He stared at it, then at Peter. "You gave me something," Isaiah whispered, voice barely a thread. "So you ain't going down there empty." He laid the horse on Peter's chest under the canvas like a quiet promise. Then came the hard part. Isaiah was small, but he wasn't weak. He used his weight the way a street kid uses his body in a fight, smart angles, stubborn leverage. He pushed and pulled and dragged until his lungs burned. Peter's body rolled to the edge. Isaiah took a breath like he was bracing for impact, then shoved. The body dropped into the hole with a dull thump that didn't sound like a man. It sounded like they wanted it to sound, like nothing, but Isaiah didn't let it be nothing. He stood at the edge and spoke, quiet but steady, as if the woods were a courtroom and he was giving testimony. "Peter," he said, just the name, clean, solid. "You worked here, you made things for kids, you didn't deserve this." He didn't know prayers, but he knew truth. And truth, said right, can cut deeper than prayer. Then he started filling the hole. Dirt fell heavy. Stones clacked. The canvas disappeared under earth. The outline vanished. The mound formed. Each shovel of dirt felt like another secret being buried, not just Peter. The whole idea that he was ever a man. When Isaiah finished, he smoothed the top with the back of the spade the way he'd seen men pat down soil after planting, like he was planting something. He stood there, exhausted, and something cold settled in him, not fear, a decision. Because he realized the worst part wasn't that Peter died. People died all the time on that land. The worst part was how easy it was for them to pretend Peter never existed. No marker, no words, no memory. A man could vanish like smoke. Isaiah walked back as the sun fell low, hands bleeding, clothes stiff with dirt, head full of a map he didn't want but couldn't shake. When he reached the quarters, Mama Tess saw his hands and didn't ask loud. She asked soft, the way you ask when you already know. "What they had you doing?" Isaiah's voice came out flat. "They made me put Peter in the ground." Mama Tess closed her eyes like she was holding something back. She reached for his hands, cleaned them with care, and Isaiah noticed how gentle she was, like she was trying to rub the plantation off his skin. "I put something with him," Isaiah said. "The little horse he made." Mama Tess pulled him close. "Good." He leaned into her and the words spilled out, quiet and angry. He didn't even say Peter's name right, like Peter was just a thing. Mama Tess's voice lowered even more. "Baby, they don't see us as people when we breathing. You think they gonna start seeing it when we cold." Isaiah stared at the dirt floor, jaw tight. Mama Tess tipped his chin up with one finger. "But you said his name. You heard me. You said it. That matters." Isaiah didn't answer, not because he didn't believe her, because a thought had already taken root. If saying a name mattered, then forgetting a name was murder all over again. That night Isaiah lay down and stared into darkness, listening to the small sounds of the quarters, coughs, whispers, a baby fussing, somebody praying under their breath. He could still feel the weight of the spade in his hands, and he knew this wasn't going to be the last time, because on plantations death comes like bills. It don't care if you ready. It just shows up and somebody has to pay. He didn't know it yet, but the overseer had just put a job on him. Not a chore. A position. The kind of position that makes you dangerous without ever throwing a punch. A keeper of where the bodies go. A boy who knows too much. And the next time somebody died, Isaiah wouldn't just be burying a man. He'd be collecting evidence. And evidence makes you a target. Because the moment Isaiah started remembering on purpose, somebody on that plantation was going to notice. And when they did, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd make an example. The second body came quicker than Isaiah expected. That's how it works when you've been chosen. The job finds you. You don't find it. 2 weeks after Peter, the overseer caught Isaiah by the elbow before breakfast. Didn't even bother with a reason. "You, grab the spade." "No, please. No hurry, just ownership." Isaiah's stomach tightened. Not from hunger. From knowing he was about to walk back into that quiet patch of woods where the air felt heavier than it should. Mama Tess watched him leave without a sound, but her eyes followed him like she was trying to memorize his face in case the day took him. They didn't take him to the clearing this time. They took him behind the quarters where the ground dipped low and rainwater liked to collect. A woman lay there, wrapped fast. No canvas, just a worn sheet pulled tight like they were trying to hide the fact she'd ever had a shape. The overseer didn't say her name. He never did unless it benefited him. "She was sick," he said. "You know what to do." Isaiah looked at the bundle and felt his throat close. He'd seen her alive yesterday, moving slow. Leaning on the side of a cabin, breathing like every breath cost money. He didn't ask why she died. On that land, why was a luxury. He just nodded because nodding kept you alive. The walk to the woods felt different now, not because the path changed, because Isaiah did. The first time he walked like a child being dragged into something he couldn't understand. This time he walked like someone carrying a secret with sharp edges. The overseer brought 2 men with him, both older, both quiet, both looking at the ground like their eyes didn't want to be part of this. They weren't there to help. They were there to make sure Isaiah didn't run. A power imbalance. 3 grown men and a child with a spade. Isaiah clocked it, filed it away. Even at 7, he understood the math of control. When they reached the burial stretch, the overseer pointed without looking at Isaiah's face. "Over there, under that crooked pine." Isaiah didn't move immediately. He stared at the pine, then at the ground. Something inside him shifted. Not rebellion, not yet, but awareness. If he was going to be forced into this, then he wasn't going to do it blind. He stepped closer to the spot and took a breath. Then he dug. The dirt wasn't as stubborn as Peter's place, but it was wet and heavy, clumping to the spade like it didn't want to let go. His arms burned. His palms stung where old blisters had barely healed. The overseer stood off to the side, talking low to the men, laughing once like somebody told a joke. Isaiah didn't hear the words, but he heard the disrespect. They were calm while somebody's life was being erased. That was the kind of calm Isaiah never forgot. When the hole was ready, Isaiah climbed out and stood there breathing hard. The overseer nodded like he was inspecting a fence post. "Good. Roll her in." The two men stepped forward and tipped the body. It slid into the ground without ceremony, without hesitation, fast, like they were trying to finish before their conscience woke up. Isaiah watched the bundle hit the bottom and something in him refused, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet refusal to let her go down unnamed. He looked at the overseer. The man was already turning away, done with it. Isaiah made his move while nobody was paying attention. He stepped close to the grave like he was just doing his job, then slipped his hand into his pocket, a small button. He depried it off a torn coat behind the wash line that morning. It wasn't special to anybody else, but Isaiah had seen the woman fix clothes for people, patch and stitch and make something last a little longer than it was meant to. A button fit her. He dropped it into the grave, quick, clean, like a dealer palming a card. Then he started shoveling dirt. The overseer didn't stop him, didn't care. Isaiah kept his eyes down, but his mind stayed sharp. He listened for footsteps. He watched shadows. He measured how long it took for a man like that to get bored and look away. Because that was the opening, and Isaiah was learning openings. By the time the grave was filled, Isaiah's shoulders were shaking from strain. The mound sat there raw and fresh, like a wound. The overseer spit into the dirt and nodded at Isaiah. "Come on." They walked back and Isaiah's mind replayed everything. The spot, the tree, the wet feel of the soil, the button dropping into darkness. He didn't know her name. That bothered him worse than the digging. That night Isaiah waited until the quarters got quiet, until breathing turned heavy and the world went soft around the edges. Then he slipped to Mama Tess. Low voice, barely a whisper. "Who died today?" Mama Tess didn't answer right away. She looked around like the walls had ears, because on that land sometimes they did. Finally, she said, "Sarah Me." What? Isaiah repeated it in his head like he was locking a door. "Sarah Me, Sarah Me, Sarah Me." Then he asked the next question, the one that could get him hurt if it reached the wrong ears. "What'd she do before she got sick?" Mama Tess stared at him a long second, like she was seeing a line being crossed. "She used to mend," Mama Tess said. "Fix what other folks threw away. Kept babies wrapped. Kept men's shirts together. Kept people decent." Isaiah nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. "A button, that was right." Mama Tess leaned closer. "Why you asking like this?" Isaiah didn't tell her everything. Not the button. Not the way he spoke Peter's name out loud in the woods. Not the decision forming in his chest. He just said, "I don't want to forget." What? Mama Tess's face tightened, pain and pride fighting for space. "Then you better learn how to remember without getting caught," she whispered. "Because some folks hate memory, hate it like it's a weapon." Isaiah lay down after that, staring at the ceiling, feeling older than his years. The next morning the overseer came again, and then again. Sometimes it was a fever, sometimes it was a fall, sometimes it was a body brought out quiet after the whipping post, carried like the air itself didn't want to touch it. Every time Isaiah dug, every time Isaiah watched, he noticed patterns. The overseer always chose spots near certain trees, never random. Like he wanted the dead tucked away in a specific stretch, where the living wouldn't wander. Isaiah started building the map in his head without even trying. Twisted oak, Peter, crooked pine, Sarah Me, a dip by the creek bend, a child too small for the sheet they wrapped her in, a patch where wild roses grew stubborn, bright in the wrong place, a woman who delivered babies until her own body quit. Isaiah didn't write it, he couldn't, but he counted it the way men count money they don't want stolen. 1, 2, 3, and with every number he added something else. A pebble, a scrap of cloth. A piece of iron shaved thin and hidden in his palm, not for beauty, for proof, because Isaiah understood something dangerous. If you can't mark a grave with stone, you mark it with meaning, and meaning can outlive whips, but secrets don't stay secret forever. One afternoon, after Isaiah finished covering another mound, he felt eyes on him. Not the overseer's lazy glance, something sharper. He turned slowly and saw one of the older field hands standing at the tree line, watching him like he'd been watching for a while. The man didn't speak, just held Isaiah's gaze, steady and unreadable. Then he lifted 2 fingers and pointed first at Isaiah, then at the fresh dirt. A silent question. Isaiah's heart kicked hard against his ribs. because the wrong answer could get him sold. Or worse, he didn't move, didn't blink. The old man's mouth barely moved, just enough for Isaiah to catch the words. "You putting something in there, ain't you?" Isaiah felt the woods close in around him, because now somebody knew, and the next move wasn't his anymore. Isaiah didn't answer him. That silence wasn't fear, it was calculation, because once a secret is spoken, it don't belong to you anymore. It starts looking for the wrong ears. The old man waited. Wind slid through the trees, brushing the fresh mound like fingers testing a bruise. Isaiah finally spoke, low and steady. "I put respect in the ground." The man studied him, not judging, measuring. "Respect get you killed on this land," he said. Then he turned and walked away like he'd never been there. That was worse than a threat, because it meant the man understood and chose to live with it. From that day on, Isaiah felt the weight shift. People started watching him differently. Not obvious, just long glances. Pauses in conversation when he walked by. Mothers pulling kids a little closer when death came through the quarters. Nobody asked questions out loud, but the rumor moved anyway. The boy remembers, and remembering was dangerous currency. The overseer noticed it too, not the remembering, the attention. One afternoon, he grabbed Isaiah by the collar and pulled him close enough for Isaiah to smell tobacco and sweat. "You getting ideas, boy?" Isaiah kept his eyes down. "No, sir." The overseer studied him, looking for cracks. "You talk too much." "No, sir." That was true. Isaiah had learned silence the way other kids learned games. The overseer shoved him away. "Good, because I don't like noise." That night Mama Tess whispered to him in the dark, "You gotta be careful. Folks notice patterns. Patterns get broken." Isaiah nodded, but inside something else had hardened, because the dead weren't stopping. Summer came, and death came faster with it. Heat took men in the fields. Fever took babies in the night. Women bled out with no doctor coming because a doctor cost money and mercy didn't. Isaiah's count climbed. 10, 15, 20. Each one got something, always small, always hidden, always tied to who they were. But Isaiah did more than bury objects. He buried names in his mind. He walked the woods at night sometimes when he could, tracing paths without light, teaching his feet where to step, teaching his memory where each soul rested. He could close his eyes and see it. Not dirt, a map nobody else had. And maps make men powerful or hunted. The breaking point came the day the dogs followed him. It wasn't on purpose. Dogs don't think like men, they smell. Isaiah had slipped off after dusk just to stand near one of the older graves, not to dig, just to remember. The dogs picked up his trail. He heard them before he saw them. Low growls, chains clinking, breath hot and fast. Isaiah froze. Running would turn it into a chase. A chase would end with blood. He stepped out into the open and raised his hand slow. The overseer came through the trees with a smile already loaded. "What you doing out here, boy?" Isaiah swallowed. "Got lost." The overseer laughed. "You don't get lost, you get ideas." He walked closer, eyes scanning the ground, the trees, the mounds. "You like this place too much." Isaiah's heart hammered, but his voice stayed calm. "It's quiet." The overseer's smile thinned. "Quiet places hide things." He leaned in, voice sharp as a blade. "If I find out you hiding anything out here, anything at all, I'll make sure you're the next one in the ground, and nobody will remember your name." That was the real threat, not death, erasure. The overseer snapped the dogs back and walked away, boots crunching leaves like punctuation. Isaiah didn't move until the sound was gone. Then he dropped to his knees, not in prayer but in resolve, because now he understood the truth of the board. The overseer wasn't afraid of bodies. He was afraid of memory. And that meant Isaiah was already in a war he didn't choose, a quiet one. The kind that ends with either a legacy or a warning carved into the ground. Isaiah stood up slowly, eyes on the trees, mind already planning. If he was going to keep remembering, he couldn't do it alone, and the next move would change everything. Isaiah knew better than to rush his next move. Rushing gets you noticed, and noticed boys don't grow old on plantations. So he waited. He kept digging when they told him to dig, kept his head down, kept his hands dirty and his mouth clean. To the overseer, he went back to being useful, small, quiet, replaceable. But underneath that obedience, Isaiah was building something sharper, because he understood the truth most people never learn until it's too late. Power doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from being the only one who knows where everything is buried. The first person he tested wasn't brave, and that's why Isaiah chose him. Ezekiel. He was new, mid-50s maybe, tall, lean, eyes that didn't flinch when pain passed through the quarters, the kind of man who'd survived enough to know when to listen. Isaiah noticed Ezekiel the same way you notice a man counting cards without moving his lips, too aware. One evening, Isaiah saw him staring at a scrap of paper that had wrapped a sack of salt pork, not just looking, reading. Isaiah didn't walk up fast, he didn't act curious, he moved like coincidence. "You know what that say?" Isaiah whispered. Ezekiel snapped the paper closed, eyes sharp. For half a second, Isaiah thought he'd miscalculated. Then Ezekiel exhaled. "Dangerous thing to say out loud, boy." Isaiah didn't blink. "Dangerous things already know my name." That got Ezekiel's attention. They stood there in the dark, two people measuring risk from opposite sides. "What kind of danger you talking about?" Ezekiel asked. Isaiah leaned in just enough. "I know where they put the bodies, all of them." Silence, not empty silence, loaded silence. Ezekiel studied Isaiah like he was trying to decide whether this was truth or a trap. "How many?" Ezekiel finally asked. Isaiah answered without hesitation. 32. Ezekiel's breath caught, just once. "That ain't a number a child guesses." "No," Isaiah said, "it's a number you carry." They didn't say anything else that night. Didn't need to. But the next evening, Ezekiel found Isaiah behind the quarters pretending to mend a fence. "You sure you want another soul knowing that?" Ezekiel asked quietly. Isaiah tightened the wire. "I'm sure I don't want to die with it locked in my head." Ezekiel nodded. "Then we got work." That's how it started. Not with lessons, with trust. Ezekiel scratched letters into dirt when the moon was low, not the clean kind, the kind born out of survival. "This how you keep memory from dying with you," he said. "But hear me clear, if they catch you, they won't just break your hands, they'll break everybody near you." Isaiah absorbed every shape, every sound. Letters became tools. Names became weapons. Because once something is written, it can outlive a whip. Isaiah began recording at night using bark, charcoal, stolen scraps. Writing small, tight, ruthless with space. Peter, oak tree, Carver, horse, Sarah, me, crooked pine. But he didn't write poetry, he wrote coordinates. Because someday someone would need to find them, but secrets multiply danger. One night, as Isaiah slid the bark into a hollow log near the burial ground, he heard footsteps that were Ezekiel's. Heavy, careless, white boots. Isaiah froze, heart slamming so loud he was sure the trees could hear it. A lantern swung into view. The overseer's voice cut the dark. "Boy." Isaiah stepped out slow, empty hands visible. "What you doing way out here?" Isaiah swallowed and answered carefully. "Looking for wood." What? The overseer raised the lantern, light crawling over the trees, the ground, the hollow log inches from Isaiah's leg. "Funny," the overseer said softly, "because I keep feeling like this land got secrets." The lantern lifted higher, closer. One step more and the log would glow. Isaiah's mind raced. No running, no lies, only one move left. He met the overseer's eyes. "I ain't smart enough for secrets," Isaiah said, "just strong enough to dig." The overseer stared at him a long second. Then he smiled. "That's so." He lowered the lantern. "Good, because smart boys disappear faster." The overseer turned and walked away. Isaiah didn't move for a long time, because now it was clear. He wasn't just burying the dead anymore. He was hiding evidence in plain sight, and the overseer was circling. Waiting for proof, waiting for a mistake, and the next time Isaiah might not walk away. By the time Isaiah turned 10, death knew his schedule. It stopped surprising him. It just showed up, tapped him on the shoulder, and waited. Sometimes it came at dawn. Sometimes it came in the middle of work. Sometimes it crept in overnight and left a body cooling before anyone cried out. And every time the overseer came looking for Isaiah, never raised his voice, never rushed. That's how you know a man thinks he owns you. Isaiah's hands grew tougher, his back stronger. His face learned how to stay blank no matter what lay on the ground in front of him. But inside, his mind stayed sharp, sharper than ever. Because the map was getting crowded. 42 graves. He counted them the way other men count debts. Each one had a place, a reason, a story. He could walk the burial stretch blind now, knew which roots would snag the shovel, which spots filled with water after rain, which trees leaned far enough to throw shade at noon. This land wasn't random, it was organized. And Isaiah was the only one who understood the system. That made him valuable and dangerous. Ezekiel kept teaching him, letters first, then words. Then how to make meaning survive on scraps that weren't meant to last. You don't write everything, Ezekiel warned one night. You write enough. Isaiah nodded. He understood restraint. Too much information gets you killed. So he built redundancy, memory in his head, record in the bark, objects in the earth. If one failed, the others might survive, but even the smartest operations draw heat. The breaking moment came with a whipping. A young man named James tried to run. They caught him before the fence, brought him back bloody and breathing hard, eyes still wild with freedom. They tied him to the post while the quarters watched, because fear works better with an audience. Isaiah stood at the edge of the crowd, fists clenched, jaw tight. James never screamed, not once. When it was over, they cut him down and left him where he fell. The overseer didn't look at Isaiah when he spoke. Take care of it. James was still warm when Isaiah reached him. That changed something. Isaiah dug fast, hard, angry. When nobody was watching, he broke a sliver from an iron chain near the blacksmith shed. Sharp. Cold, he dropped it into the grave. Then he did something new. He spoke louder than he ever had before, not shouting but clear. James, he said, you ran. The trees swallowed the word, but Isaiah felt it settle. That night Ezekiel found him shaking. You can't do that again, Ezekiel warned. Names carry weight. That's the point, Isaiah said. Ezekiel looked at him a long time. Then you better be ready for what comes with it. Because the plantation noticed, not the name, the change. Isaiah wasn't just digging anymore, he was claiming. One afternoon the overseer followed him longer than usual, watched where he stepped, where he stopped. You ever think about why they don't put stones out here? The overseer asked casually. Isaiah shook his head. No, sir. Because stones make places permanent, the overseer said, and some things ain't meant to last. He smiled without humor. You understand that, right? Isaiah nodded, but inside he locked the words away. Permanent, that was the threat, that was the fear. The overseer didn't want bodies erased. He wanted proof erased. And Isaiah had too much of it. That night Mama Tess coughed hard, the sound deep and wet. Isaiah sat with her, holding her hand, feeling how thin it had grown. You carrying too much, she whispered. Dead folks heavy. Isaiah swallowed. Somebody gotta do it. Mama Tess opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked. Then don't do it alone. Those words stayed with him, because Ezekiel wasn't enough. One man teaching him letters wasn't a network. Isaiah needed someone younger, someone patient, someone who could survive if he didn't. The answer came to him quietly. A girl, sharp eyes, quick hands, always watching. Her name was Ruth, and she had already noticed him. Ruth didn't watch him like a child watches a mystery. She watched him like someone trying to survive. Isaiah noticed it first when she stopped pretending not to. Laundry line, midday heat, white sheets snapping like flags of surrender. Isaiah passed by with the spade on his shoulder, head down like always. Ruth's hands kept working. Her eyes didn't. They followed him, measured him, tracked how he moved like the ground already belonged to him. That kind of attention was dangerous, but it was also rare. Isaiah didn't approach her right away. You don't rush trust. You let it come to you when it's ready to talk. It came 3 days later. Someone died in the big house. A woman's servant fell down the back stairs. Neck snapped. They wrapped her quick and quiet, didn't want the other servants getting ideas about fragility. Isaiah walked past Ruth on his way out. She whispered, "You going to the woods?" It wasn't a question. Isaiah kept walking. That night when the quarters slept and the world loosened its grip, Isaiah heard footsteps behind him. Soft, careful, not white boots. He turned. Ruth stood there, barefoot, hair wrapped, eyes steady. "You ain't the only one who notices patterns," she said. Isaiah didn't answer. Silence was his first line of defense. "My mama died 3 years ago," Ruth continued. "One night she was there. Next morning gone. Nobody told me where." Isaiah felt the air shift. "People don't just vanish," she said. "You know where they put her." It wasn't accusation, it was hunger. Isaiah weighed the risk. Every move from here had consequences, exposure, punishment, loss of everything he'd built. Mama Tess's voice echoed in his head, "Don't do it alone." Isaiah turned and started walking. Ruth followed. He didn't speak until they reached the trees. The woods swallowed sound, bent light, made truth harder to overhear. He stopped beneath a dogwood tree and pointed. "Here." Ruth dropped to her knees like her legs had been waiting for permission to give out. Her hands pressed into the dirt, fingers digging shallow, desperate. "She wore red," Ruth whispered. "A scarf." Isaiah nodded. "I tore a piece, put it with her." Ruth cried without sound, shoulders shaking, grief finally finding a place to land. When she stood, her eyes weren't soft anymore. They were set. "Teach me," she said. Isaiah shook his head. "This ain't a kindness, it's a sentence." "I already got one," Ruth replied, living like she never existed. Isaiah studied her. The courage, the anger, the focus, he saw himself. "All right," he said finally, "but you listen close. You mess up, we both disappear." Ruth didn't flinch. "I don't forget." That's when Isaiah knew. The burden was splitting, but so was the danger, because now the secret wasn't just his, and secrets spread even when you swear they won't. Somewhere beyond the trees, a lantern flared to life, and Isaiah felt it. The game was tightening. Teaching Ruth changed the rhythm. Isaiah felt it immediately. Moves had to be cleaner now, slower, every step double-checked. Because once you bring someone else into the game, mistakes don't just cost you, they cost blood. They didn't start with writing, they started with walking. Isaiah took Ruth through the burial ground at night, no lantern, no moon when he could help it. He made her learn the land the way blind men learn rooms. "Don't look first," he told her. "Feel." Roots underfoot, the slope near the creek, the way the ground softened where too many bodies rested close, the way certain trees leaned not by accident but because the soil beneath them was tired. Ruth learned fast, too fast. That scared him more than slow learners ever could. "Peter," Isaiah said one night, stopping beneath the twisted oak. Ruth didn't ask who, she waited. "He carved," Isaiah continued. "Hands stayed gentle even when the world didn't." Ruth nodded. "Oak twisted roots first." Isaiah said nothing, but something in his chest tightened. That was how memory spread, and spread draws attention. Ezekiel warned him. 3 people knowing something ain't 3 times safer," he said. "It's 3 times louder." Isaiah knew that, but he also knew this wasn't optional anymore, because death didn't slow down for secrecy. A child died of fever 2 weeks later, 5 years old, too small for the work sack they wrapped her in. The overseer didn't even walk Isaiah to the woods this time. He just pointed and went back to his ledger. Ruth followed at a distance, hidden, heart racing. Isaiah dug while she watched. Then he did something new. He handed Ruth the object, a small corn-husk doll, rough and uneven. "Your turn," he said. Ruth's hands trembled as she placed it in the grave. Then Isaiah nodded once. "You don't speak her name yet," he whispered. "Not until you can carry it." That's how he kept control. Names weren't free, they were earned, but control doesn't mean invisibility. The overseer noticed Ruth's proximity, noticed how she lingered near Isaiah, noticed how the two of them avoided eye contact like people sharing a secret. One afternoon he called Ruth into the big house. Isaiah felt it before he heard about it, that tightening in the air, that shift when someone starts asking the wrong questions. Ruth came back pale, jaw tight. "He asked me why I watch you," she said. Isaiah didn't respond right away. He watched the yard, measured who was near. "What you say?" he asked finally. "That you dig," Ruth replied, "and I seen death enough to want to understand it." Isaiah nodded slowly. The overseer was circling closer now, not attacking, testing. That's when Mama Tess's health turned. The cough deepened. Blood showed up on cloth. Her strength thinned like worn fabric. Isaiah sat with her every night, listening to her breathing turn into labor. "You carrying more than the dead now," she whispered one night. "You carrying the future." Isaiah clenched his jaw. "I'll handle it." Mama Tess smiled faintly. "That's what scares me." She died before dawn. Isaiah dug her grave himself. No overseer watching. No orders given. That alone was dangerous. Ruth stood beside him as he worked, tears silent. Isaiah placed a strip of cloth from Mama Tess's old dress in the grave, blue, faded, strong. Then he spoke her name, out loud, clear. The woods heard it, and someone else did too. A snap of a branch, too deliberate. Isaiah's head lifted. At the edge of the trees, a shadow moved, not running, listening. Ruth grabbed Isaiah's sleeve, eyes wide. Isaiah felt the weight of it settle. Mama Tess had been right. The secret was no longer buried, it was being watched. And the next move wouldn't be quiet at all. Isaiah didn't chase the shadow. That's what fear wants you to do. Instead, he finished the grave, every motion steady, every breath controlled, like the watcher wasn't there at all. Because if someone was listening, panic would be the confession. When the dirt was packed and the ground smoothed, Isaiah stood, wiped his hands on his pants, and waited. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No lantern. No dogs, just the woods holding their breath. Ruth whispered, "Someone saw." Isaiah nodded once. "Yeah." "Who?" "That don't matter yet." What mattered was this. Someone knew Mama Tess was buried without orders. That meant Isaiah had crossed an invisible line. He walked Ruth back in silence, taking a longer route, doubling back twice, the way men do when they think they're being followed. When they reached the quarters, Isaiah didn't say good night. He said, "If they ask you anything tomorrow, you say nothing new." Ruth swallowed. "And if they don't ask?" Isaiah's voice dropped. "Then it means they already decided." The next day felt wrong from the start. The overseer didn't come for Isaiah. That had never happened before. No shout, no order, no spade pointed at the ground. Instead, two white men Isaiah didn't recognize arrived on horseback just after noon. Clean boots, clean hands, the kind of men who don't get dirty themselves, buyers. They spoke quietly with the overseer near the big house. Papers came out. Names were read. Isaiah watched from the edge of the field, heart pounding. Selling people was common. Selling specific people was not. The overseer glanced over once, right at Isaiah, held his gaze a beat too long, then looked away. That night Ezekiel found Isaiah by the fence line. "They asking about you," Ezekiel said. "Not directly, but careful questions." Isaiah closed his eyes. "About what?" he asked. Ezekiel hesitated. "About why you're always the one digging. About why folks come to you when somebody dies. About why the woods feel organized." Isaiah exhaled slowly. The map was leaking. "They think I'm trouble?" Isaiah asked. Ezekiel shook his head. "Worse, they think you're valuable." Isaiah understood immediately. Trouble gets whipped. Value gets sold. Ruth ran up then, breathless. "They took Samuel," she said. "The little boy from the South Row sold him this afternoon." Isaiah felt something crack open in his chest. Samuel, 4 years old, always clung to his father's leg. Isaiah knew where Samuel's father was buried. He knew exactly where. That night Isaiah couldn't sleep. Not because of fear for himself, but because he saw the future clearly now. They weren't going to kill him. They were going to remove him. Break the map by removing the one who carried it. And if that happened, every grave would become anonymous again. Every name would die a second time. Isaiah sat up in the dark, jaw set. This was no longer about hiding. It was about survival of the memory. He leaned toward Ruth's pallet and whispered, "If they take me, you remember." Ruth's eyes opened wide. "Take you where?" Isaiah didn't answer, because outside, somewhere beyond the quarters, a horse snorted and boots crunched dirt, coming closer. The boots stopped just short of the quarters. That pause was deliberate. Power likes to let you feel it coming. Isaiah stayed still, too still. He counted breaths instead of seconds, the way men do when they're about to be tested. Ruth's eyes were on him now, wide but sharp. She was learning what silence meant. A voice cut through the dark. Boy. Not the overseer, older, calmer, the kind of calm that comes from signing papers instead of swinging whips. Isaiah rose slowly and stepped into the open. Moonlight caught his face. He kept it blank, useful, uninteresting. The man on the horse looked down at him like he was appraising a tool. "You Isaiah?" "Yes, sir. I hear you strong for your size." Isaiah didn't answer that. Compliments were traps. The man nodded to the overseer standing just behind him. "This the one." The overseer smiled thin. "That's him." Isaiah felt the board snap into focus. They weren't here to punish him. They were here to move him. The man dismounted and walked a slow circle around Isaiah, eyes sharp, hands clean. "You ever been off this land?" "No, sir." "Ever thought about it?" Isaiah kept his gaze down. "I think about what I'm told." The man chuckled. "Smart answer." He stopped in front of Isaiah. "We got a place needs boys like you, strong back, quiet mouth, pays good." Pays good? Isaiah almost smiled. That word didn't mean money, it meant distance. It meant Mississippi, Louisiana, somewhere far enough that the map in his head would rot without maintenance. The overseer leaned in. "He's useful," he said, "but he's particular." The man waved him off. "All tools got quirks." Isaiah spoke before he could stop himself. "When?" The man raised an eyebrow, eager. "No, sir," Isaiah said quickly. "Just like to know." The man nodded. "Sunup." Ruth made a sound then, small, caught in her throat. The man glanced past Isaiah. "Girl got something to say." Isaiah turned just enough to shake his head once. Ruth swallowed it. Good. After they left, the quarters stayed silent. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cried. They all knew what a sale meant. Isaiah went back inside and sat beside Ruth. "They taking you," she whispered. "Yeah." "You coming back?" Isaiah looked at his hands, scarred, calloused, evidence, "I don't know." That was the truth. He reached under the pallet and pulled out a bundle wrapped tight in cloth. Bark, charcoal marks, names, coordinates, lives. He pressed it into Ruth's hands. "If I don't come back," he said, "you keep this alive. You walk the ground, you teach someone else." Ruth's hands shook. "What if they watch me?" "They will." "What if they catch me?" Isaiah met her eyes. "Then you remember quiet. Memory don't always need proof." Outside, a horse stamped, impatient. Isaiah lay back down but didn't sleep, because he knew this was the pivot. Either the memory survived him, or it ended at dawn. And somewhere beneath twisted roots and tired soil, the dead waited to see which way the game would break. Dawn came wrong, too quiet. No birds, no breeze, just that pale light creeping in like it didn't want to be seen. Isaiah stood before they came for him. He didn't pack clothes, didn't need to. Whatever they were taking him to wasn't a place you settled into. It was a place you survived or didn't. He stepped outside and looked once toward the trees. Not long. Long looks turn into weakness. Then the horse snorted again, closer now. The man from the night before didn't bother with words this time. He nodded at Isaiah, motioned toward the reins. "Move." Isaiah walked. Every step away from the quarters felt heavier than the shovel ever had. Not because he was afraid of where he was going, because he knew what he was leaving behind. Ruth stood at the edge of the cabins, fists clenched, eyes burning. She didn't cry. Crying would have been a surrender. Isaiah met her gaze once, just once. That was enough. They rode him out fast, past the fields, past the barns, past the last fence where the ground changed color. When the trees swallowed the path, Isaiah felt something twist inside him. The burial ground was close, too close. The horse slowed. The man pulled the reins and looked down at Isaiah. One last stop. Isaiah's pulse jumped. They led him off the path, deeper into the woods, toward the place that never grew right, toward the twisted oak, toward the map no one was supposed to understand. The overseer stepped out from behind a tree, smiling. You didn't think we'd let you leave without settling something, did you? Isaiah said nothing. Silence was the only weapon he had left. The overseer circled him, boots crunching leaves. Funny thing about memory, he said. It spreads, makes people brave, makes them talk. Isaiah felt the weight of every name press against his chest. Tell me, the overseer continued, how many you got out here? Isaiah looked at the ground. The overseer leaned in, voice low and cruel. Because if you don't tell me, I'll start digging until I find out. That was the threat, not death, desecration. Isaiah lifted his head slowly, and for the first time in his life he chose defiance. You dig, he said quietly, you won't stop. The overseer laughed. Watch me. He grabbed a shovel from one of the men and drove it into the soil near the oak. The sound was wrong, hollow. The overseer froze. Isaiah didn't move because the ground had just spoken. And now the secret was out. The overseer didn't pull the shovel back right away. That hollow sound sat between them, loud as a gunshot in a quiet room. Everybody heard it. The men with him shifted their weight. One of them glanced toward the trees like the woods themselves had just leaned in closer. Isaiah stayed still. That was the move. Stillness after revelation is power. The overseer cleared his throat and laughed, but it came out thin. Ground soft, that's all. Pushed the shovel again. Same sound, dull, empty. Wrong, now his smile was gone. He stabbed the earth harder, twisting the blade. Dirt collapsed in on itself, exposing fabric. Old, dark, fragile, a body, no marker, no sign, just proof. The overseer stepped back like the ground had bitten him. How many? He demanded, voice sharp now, cracking at the edges. Isaiah didn't answer. One of the men crossed himself. Another muttered something under his breath. This wasn't just disobedience anymore. This was scale. The overseer's eyes moved across the trees, the slight rises in the soil, the unnatural order of it all. For the first time he saw it, not land but structure, a system. You've been busy, he said low. Isaiah finally spoke. They were already dead. That ain't the point, the overseer snapped. You don't get to decide what gets remembered. Isaiah looked at him then, not with anger, with certainty. Somebody does. That's when the balance tipped. The man on the horse, the buyer, stepped forward slowly. His tone wasn't cruel, it was practical. This boy ain't going to Mississippi, he said. He's a liability. Isaiah felt the shift immediately. Mississippi had been distance. This was final. The overseer turned. He's valuable. Not like this, the man replied. You sell a boy. You don't sell a graveyard. Isaiah's pulse stayed steady. Fear wastes energy. The buyer studied Isaiah with new eyes. You built all this. Isaiah didn't nod, didn't deny. The buyer exhaled through his nose. Smart, too smart. He turned to the overseer. If word gets out, folks start asking questions about missing people, about land, about ownership. The overseer's jaw tightened. He looked at Isaiah like he was seeing a knife hidden in cloth. You taught others? The overseer asked. Isaiah's silence answered for him. The overseer's hand flexed. Who? Isaiah's gaze drifted, just a fraction, toward the path back to the quarters. That was all it took. The overseer followed the look and smiled. Well, he said softly, looks like we got more cleaning to do. That's when Isaiah understood the real danger. Not to himself, to Ruth, to Ezekiel, to the memory. The buyer swung back onto his horse. Do what you need, he said. Just make sure this don't become a story. They started walking Isaiah back, but not toward the path, toward the deeper woods, toward a place where screams don't travel. Isaiah's mind raced, not with panic but with strategy. He needed one thing, one distraction, one crack. As they passed the creek bend, Isaiah stumbled on purpose. The man holding his arm cursed and tightened his grip. That moment, that tightening was enough. Isaiah twisted, drove his elbow back and ran, not toward the quarters, toward the graves. Because if he was going down, he wasn't going down quiet. And behind him, boots thundered. Dogs barked. And the woods, his woods, woke up. Isaiah ran like the ground belonged to him, because in a way it did. He didn't sprint blind. He cut left where roots rose, ducking low where branches snagged coats. crossing soft earth that swallowed heavy boots. The dogs barked, confused, losing his scent where the soil turned damp near the creek. The men cursed behind him. One slipped. Another shouted orders that didn't land. Isaiah kept his breath tight, short pulls, controlled. Panic burns oxygen. He couldn't afford that. He hit the burial stretch and didn't slow. That was the mistake they made, thinking the dead would trip him up. Isaiah knew every rise, every hollow, every place where the earth was tired and would give if you stepped wrong. He veered past the twisted oak, brushed the birch, slid through the narrow cut near the fence line. He could feel names under his feet like pressure, like a warning, like a promise. Behind him a dog yelped, a man shouted. Another fell hard, the sound sharp and final. Isaiah didn't look back. He reached the hollowed oak at the far edge, the one struck by lightning long before his time, the tree that looked dead but wasn't, the tree that kept secrets. He slipped inside the hollow and pressed himself flat, breath shallow, heart steady. Bark records wrapped tight in oilcloth were already there, objects stacked careful, proof layered with patience. Footsteps closed in. A lantern flared. Light swept across the trees, the ground, the mounds. A boot stopped inches from the hollow. Isaiah felt the heat of it through the wood. The overseer's voice came soft now, close, too close. "I know you in here, boy." Isaiah didn't move. Silence stretched, dangerous silence. The kind that decides things. The lantern tilted, light skimming the opening. Isaiah closed his eyes and counted names. Peter, Sarah, me, James, Mama Tess. He felt the tree settle around him, old and stubborn and full of memory. The overseer tapped the trunk with the shovel. Once. Twice. "Last chance," he said. "Come out." Isaiah stayed still. A dog sniffed, whined, pulled at the chain. Then, unexpected, a shout came from the path, urgent, panicked. "Sir, Union riders." Everything changed in one breath. The overseer swore. The lantern swung away. Boots scrambled. Orders snapped. Isaiah stayed hidden, listening to chaos move past him like a storm breaking wrong. When the woods finally went quiet again, Isaiah didn't come out. Not yet, because freedom, real freedom, doesn't arrive clean, and he needed to know who survived the night before he made his next move. Isaiah stayed inside the tree until his legs went numb. Freedom makes noise. Safety doesn't. He waited for the woods to settle back into themselves, for the birds to test the air again, for the ground to stop holding its breath. Only then did he slide out. The burial stretch looked disturbed, footprints everywhere, shovel scars, a torn patch of soil near the oak where the overseer had struck too close, too curious. Isaiah scanned fast, not counting graves, checking damage, nothing opened, nothing stolen. The dead were still his, that mattered more than his own skin. He moved low and quiet, circling wide before heading back toward the quarters. He didn't use the paths. Paths remember feet. When he reached the edge of the cabins, the place felt wrong, too empty, too still. Isaiah's chest tight. He slipped behind a cook shed and listened. Voices, low, urgent, not overseer voices, different accents. Union. The word hadn't meant freedom yet, not really. It meant chaos. It meant the board flipping and pieces flying where they didn't belong. Isaiah peeked out. White men in blue coats moved through the yard, rifles loose in their hands, not raised but not lowered either. The big house in the distance smoked, blackened along one side. Someone had set it burning but hadn't finished the job. People from the quarters stood in clusters, unsure whether to run, kneel, or speak. Isaiah didn't see Ruth. That was the real danger. He moved along the backs of the cabins, heart thudding, mind cutting through possibilities. Sold, taken, hiding. Then he heard her voice. Isaiah. Soft, urgent, controlled. She pulled him behind a cabin wall, eyes wide but focused. They came fast. Overseer ran, dogs cut loose, Ezekiel gone. Isaiah swallowed. Gone where? North, Ruth said, with them. That meant Ezekiel had made it. One piece survived. What about you? Isaiah asked. Ruth lifted her chin. I remembered. That was all she needed to say. A Union officer's voice rang out across the yard. Orders, lists, questions. Names asked for the first time like they might matter. Isaiah watched from the shadows. This wasn't victory. This was transition, and transitions are where people disappear if you're not careful. "We can't stay here," Ruth whispered. Isaiah nodded. "Not yet." "But the dead ain't going nowhere," Isaiah said. "We are." They waited until night. Union soldiers moved on quick, chasing bigger battles, bigger wins. They left the land cracked open and uncertain. Some people ran immediately. Others stayed, afraid of freedom without direction. Isaiah went back to the woods one last time before dawn. He touched the oak, the hollow, the ground. He didn't say goodbye. Goodbyes turn places into graves. Instead, he memorized one more time. Every rise, every tree, every name. Then he turned away. Years later, people would say the woods still felt wrong. That nothing grew straight there, that animals avoided it. They wouldn't know why. They wouldn't know about the boy who learned power before he learned safety. The boy who understood that memory is leverage, that silence can be strategy, that the dead can make you dangerous. They wouldn't know his name, but the ground did, and it kept it. Isaiah didn't disappear. He repositioned. That's the difference between a man running scared and a man moving pieces. Freedom scattered people like loose change. Some went north chasing rumors. Some stayed and tried to claim land that never wanted them owning it. Isaiah did neither. He stayed close enough to watch, because land remembers who bleeds into it. For months, Isaiah and Ruth lived on the edge of things. Old sheds, abandoned cabins, places nobody wanted because they felt wrong. Wrong was useful. Wrong kept strangers away. They moved at night, talked in whispers, counted food like currency. And every few weeks Isaiah went back, not to the quarters, to the woods. The burial ground didn't look the same without overseers stalking it, but danger doesn't vanish just because uniforms change. New men came sniffing around, surveyors, speculators, locals who smelled opportunity in chaos. Isaiah watched them all, and Ruth learned. She learned how to walk without leaving a trail, how to read the ground like a ledger, how to remember names without writing them where the wrong eyes could burn them. "Memory ain't just holding," Isaiah told her. "It's guarding." The first time Ruth buried someone alone, Isaiah didn't watch. That was intentional. If she needed permission, the work would die with him. She came back before dawn, hands dirty, eyes steady. "I put a ribbon," she said. She used to braid hair. Isaiah nodded once. That was succession. Years passed like that, quiet, heavy, intentional. People still died. Poor folks always do, freed or not. And when death came without ceremony, Isaiah and Ruth stepped in. Not as servants, not as tools, as operators. They never built markers. Markers attract questions. They built systems. Patterns only the right eyes could see. A stone placed wrong on purpose. A tree scarred just enough to remember. A hollow that kept growing fuller with meaning. By the time Isaiah's hair went gray, the woods had changed again. Thicker, wilder, meaner, just like the story. Isaiah's body slowed, but his mind stayed sharp. He directed now. Ruth dug more. Younger people helped without knowing the full picture. That's how you keep a thing alive, no single point of failure. One winter morning, Isaiah didn't wake up. Ruth found him laid out clean, hands folded, face calm, like a man who finished his business. In his fingers he held a scrap, bark worn thin, just a few words, no speeches, no prayers, "Put me where I belong." Ruth understood. She buried him close to the oak, close enough that the tree's shadow would cross his grave every afternoon. She placed objects with him, not one, many, because Isaiah didn't belong to a single story. He belonged to all of them. Ruth stood there long after the dirt settled. She didn't cry loud. Loud grief draws attention. Instead, she made one last move. She sealed the hollow, stone by stone, careful, deliberate, like closing a vault. On the final stone, she carved just enough. Not names, a count, because counts make people curious. And curiosity brings the right kind of trouble eventually. Years later, long after Ruth was gone, people would come asking why the woods felt heavy, why nothing grew straight, why animals avoided it like the ground could see. They'd dig, measure, debate. And when they finally broke through the wrong place, they wouldn't find treasure. They'd find receipts, names, proof. And they'd realize too late that someone had been running the board the whole time. Quiet, patient, deadly accurate, and the question wouldn't be who Isaiah was. it would be. How many more like him never got found? The first stone came loose by accident. A shovel blade hit something that didn't sound like dirt, didn't sound like root, didn't sound like anything the men on that crew were used to hearing. It rang, not loud but clean, the kind of sound that makes experienced hands stop moving. The man holding the shovel frowned, bent down, brushed soil away with his glove. Stone, cut by hand, set with intention. "This don't belong here," he muttered. That's how secrets usually die, not from curiosity. From routine. They weren't looking for graves, they weren't looking for history, they were clearing land for something new, something profitable, something fast. Progress has a way of stepping on bones without noticing. Another stone shifted, then another. Behind it wasn't gold, wasn't weapons, wasn't anything men expect when they feel excitement in their chest. It was objects, small ones, too many. Stones worn smooth by hands, bits of fabric folded tight like somebody cared how they went in, a rusted piece of chain, a button, a broken comb, wood carved by someone with patience. The crew went quiet. One of the younger men laughed nervously. "What is this, some kind of junk pile?" Nobody answered, because junk doesn't get arranged, and it damn sure doesn't get hidden like this. They dug deeper, found bark, old, fragile, writing burned dark into its surface. Tiny letters packed tight like whoever wrote them knew space was a luxury. Names, dates, places described by trees that no longer stood. The foreman swallowed, "Call it in." That's when the trouble started spreading. Because once authority hears names, the tone changes. Historians came, then lawyers, then people who spoke softly and took notes like they were counting money. The ground was scanned, measured, mapped, and the pattern emerged, not random, never random, a system, a complete one. Someone had cataloged the dead when nobody else bothered. Someone had built a ledger without paper, without permission, without being caught. And when they realized how old it was, how long it had been maintained, how many graves matched the records, that's when the question stopped being academic. Who did this? Because whoever did wasn't just remembering, they were running an operation. One that survived whips, sales, war, time. One that outlived the men who tried to erase it. And buried in the final layer, almost like an afterthought, was a single line written in a different hand. Short, uneasy, not finished. He had a son taken young, never found. That line changed everything, because now the story wasn't done. Now it was looking forward. And somewhere, walking around without knowing it, was blood connected to a man who turned memory into power. A man who never raised his voice, never fired a shot, but still beat the system. And the moment that truth started traveling, somebody was going to want control of it. Not for history, for leverage, because names don't just restore dignity. They move money, they move land, they move narratives. And the next fight wasn't in the woods. It was about who gets to tell the story and who gets cut out of it. Once money smelled the story, the tone changed. No more careful voices, no more reverence. Just meetings behind closed doors and words like ownership, rights, claims. The land froze in place. Yellow tape went up, signs followed. Lawyers arrived with shoes too clean for dirt like this. They talked about preservation, but their eyes kept drifting to the acreage, the boundaries, the value. Because memory raises property prices, and property makes men greedy. The records were moved to a secure facility. Climate-controlled, guarded, cataloged, safe, too safe. People started arguing over access. Who could see the names, who could publish them, who could profit from telling the story first. That's when the fractures appeared. Descendants came forward, some with proof, some with only whispers passed down through generations, some desperate to belong to something that finally had weight. Not all of them were honest. A few names disappeared from early drafts of reports, quietly, no announcement, just missing. A researcher noticed first, a young one, the kind that still believes paper is supposed to tell the truth. She brought it up in a meeting. The room went cold. Someone cleared their throat and said, "Those entries are complicated." Complicated meant inconvenient. It meant those names pointed to land claims that nobody wanted reopened, families nobody wanted compensated, stories that didn't fit the clean version. That's when Isaiah's shadow showed itself again. because whoever had built that archive had planned for this. Buried among the objects was redundancy, cross-references, patterns that didn't rely on any single document. You could remove a name from paper, but you couldn't remove it from the ground. And when the young researcher overlaid the map again using Isaiah's descriptions, not the official database, those missing names reappeared like ghosts stepping back into the room. That's when the pressure started. Phone calls, subtle warnings, career advice that sounded like threats. She was told to slow down. She didn't. Because now she understood what Isaiah had understood. That erasure is a choice, and choosing not to erase makes enemies. Late one night she received an anonymous email. No sender, no signature, just a sentence. He counted so they could. Attached was a photograph she'd never seen before. An old stone, carved with a number, not a name. A count. Her hands shook, because that stone wasn't in any report, which meant someone else still knew where pieces of the system were hidden. Someone who hadn't come forward, someone who was watching how this played out. And whoever that was hadn't made their move yet. The email didn't scare her. What scared her was how precise it was. No explanation, no demands. Just proof that the archive was bigger than what sat in locked rooms and polished exhibits. Proof that Isaiah's system still had hands on it. Living hands. She didn't forward the message, didn't tell her supervisor, didn't log it into evidence. That was instinct, not training. Training says share everything. Survival says you don't show your cards until you know who's cheating. She went back to the site alone 2 nights later. No press. No escorts, just boots, a flashlight, and Isaiah's descriptions folded into her jacket like a street map. Twisted oak, creek bend, ground that never settled right. She followed the wrong paths on purpose, doubling back, watching her shadow. When she reached the stone from the photograph, her breath caught. It was real, weathered, chipped, half swallowed by moss. The number carved into it matched the count in the archive. One of the missing names. She knelt and brushed dirt away. Under the stone was another marker, smaller, deliberate, not meant to be found fast. This wasn't an accident, this was insurance. A sound snapped behind her, not an animal. Footsteps. Careful, patient, she froze. The light from her flashlight caught a figure just beyond the tree line, not close enough to see a face, close enough to know she wasn't alone. A voice came low and even, carrying no panic. "You standing where you shouldn't." She turned slowly, heart steadying instead of racing. Whoever this was didn't want to chase her. They wanted to talk. "I'm documenting," she said. The figure stepped closer, older than she expected, calm, grounded. "You're tracing," the voice replied. "Big difference." She swallowed. "Who are you?" A pause, then someone Ruth taught. That name landed heavy. The figure gestured toward the ground. "You see now why he never trusted one record or one person." She nodded slowly. "Then you understand the next part," the voice said. "They're already deciding which names get remembered." "And which don't," she said. The figure's eyes stayed on her, sharp, assessing. "You gonna help keep it honest," they asked, "or you gonna let them clean it up?" Before she could answer, headlights flashed through the trees. Engines, doors slamming, voices calling her name. The figure stepped back into shadow like they'd never been there. "Choose careful," the voice said, fading. "Because once you pick a side, the ground don't forget." By the time she turned back, she was alone again, except for the stone, and the names underneath it, waiting to see who would move next. She didn't answer them right away. The voices calling her name felt louder than they should have been, too eager, too rehearsed. She stepped away from the stone, brushed the dirt from her knees, and turned toward the headlights with a face that gave nothing up. Calm was a language Isaiah had perfected. She borrowed it. "I'm here," she said. Signal was bad. They didn't question that. People who think they own the story don't expect resistance. They expect compliance dressed as professionalism. On the ride back, she watched the trees slide past the window and understood the trap clearly now. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a version that could be framed, insured, monetized, and safely disconnected from land, from blood, from consequence. Isaiah had seen this coming a century ago. That's why he never trusted a single hiding place. Never trusted paper alone. never trusted power to do the right thing without being forced. The next morning, a revised report circulated, cleaner, shorter, several names quietly absent. She stared at the screen and felt the line being drawn for her. That night she sent one message from a private account. No names, no explanation, just coordinates, and a photograph of the stone. The reply came before dawn, 3 words. We see it. By the end of the week, copies of the missing names appeared in places they weren't supposed to be. Community forums, church basements, local archives, family Bibles that suddenly made sense. The story stopped belonging to one institution. It started moving, and movement is dangerous. A meeting was scheduled, emergency, closed door. She was told her access would be temporarily adjusted. That's when she knew she'd chosen. Outside, rain hit the ground hard, soaking into soil that had already absorbed too much history to stay quiet. Somewhere far from the city, under trees that still grew wrong, someone knelt and touched a familiar stone. The count was still there, and so were the names. The question now wasn't whether Isaiah's work would survive. It was who would try to bury it again, and how far they'd be willing to go to do it. The pushback came subtle. That's how power likes it. Quiet pressure, career detours, invitations that stop arriving, doors that don't slam, they just don't open. She felt it within days, access revoked, credentials under review. Emails answered with delay, if at all. The story wasn't being killed, it was being starved. But Isaiah never relied on one supply line. Neither did the people Ruth taught, because while institutions stalled, the ground stayed honest. Church elders walked the woods with old maps and older memories. Families stood in silence where trees leaned the wrong way and said names they'd never been allowed to say out loud. Teenagers filmed headstones with shaking hands and uploaded them before anyone could stop them. The archive went public without permission. That's when the threats stopped being polite. A voicemail came late one night. No number. You're misunderstanding your role. She deleted it without replying. Another message followed 2 days later, different voice, same intent. Some stories are better handled carefully. Carefully always means controlled. She forwarded nothing. Saved everything. Because the more they pushed, the clearer Isaiah's strategy became. He hadn't just built an archive. He'd built leverage. Land claims surfaced. Old deeds challenged. Counties froze development projects overnight. Lawsuits stacked up like unpaid debts. Suddenly, those missing names mattered a lot. They mattered to families who wanted answers. They mattered to lawyers who smelled liability. They mattered to politicians who didn't want cameras pointed at mass graves during election cycles. Memory had become expensive, and expensive things attract protection and predators. One evening, as she locked her apartment door, she noticed a car idling across the street, engine running, lights off. It didn't follow her. It didn't have to. The message was clear, you're seen. She didn't panic. She went inside, sat at her table, and opened a folder she'd been building quietly for weeks. Inside were copies of everything. Maps, photos, coordinates, names, redundancies. Isaiah would have approved. She uploaded the final set to multiple servers, sent hard drives to people she trusted, and mailed one copy to a small community museum that had no reason to comply with powerful requests. Then she waited. The story broke wide a month later, not as a single headline. As dozens, different outlets, different voices, same names, no central point to attack, no single narrative to control, and the woods, the ones that never grew right, became protected land, not because of kindness, because too many people were watching now. On a quiet morning, she returned to the burial ground one last time. No press. No officials, just her and the ground. She knelt near the oak and placed her hand on the soil. It held, she whispered. The wind moved through the trees, low and steady, like an answer that didn't need words. Isaiah had seen the whole board, not just his time, all of it. And the people who tried to erase him learned the same lesson his overseer never did. You can bury bodies, you can bury stories, but once memory learns how to protect itself, it becomes untouchable. Years from now, people will argue about what really happened. They'll debate dates, motives, credit. They'll fight over who discovered what, who protected it first, who deserves to speak for the dead. That's how the surface world works. But underneath all that noise, the truth stays simple. Isaiah never wanted recognition. Recognition is loud. Loud things get destroyed. What he built was quieter than history and stronger than ownership. He understood something most powerful men never do. You don't beat the system by confronting it head-on. You outlast it. You make yourself necessary. You spread the weight so no single hand can crush it. That's what the overseer never saw. He thought control meant whips, dogs, and fear. Isaiah knew control meant information, knowing where every body was, knowing which tree mattered, knowing which object told which story, knowing that if they took him, the work would keep breathing. And it did, long after the plantation rotted, long after uniforms changed, long after men with papers and titles tried to rewrite what couldn't be rewritten. The ground stayed stubborn. Even now, people say that stretch of woods feels wrong, too quiet, too heavy. Like you stepped into a room where the past is watching how you move. Surveyors still avoid it. Animals still pass through fast. Trees still grow bent like they're leaning away from something they remember. And maybe they are. Because under that soil isn't just death. It's a ledger, a warning. A reminder that somebody was counting when nobody else cared. Some nights, if the wind hits just right, locals swear they hear footsteps where there shouldn't be any. Slow, deliberate. Like someone walking a familiar route, checking on things, making sure nothing's been disturbed. They don't say his name out loud much. Names have weight, but the ones who know, they understand that the most dangerous man in that story never carried a weapon. He carried memory, and memory, handled right, is the kind of power that never lets you go. Not even when you think the story is over. They still try to measure it. That's the funny part. They bring equipment, charts, language that sounds official enough to feel safe. They argue about soil displacement and historical context and cultural impact. But none of that explains why people lower their voices when they step into those woods. None of that explains why deals fall apart when someone suggests building there. None of that explains why every few years another stone shows up disturbed, and another set of names resurfaces that nobody remembers authorizing. Because Isaiah didn't just build a system, he trained instinct. Ruth taught others, carefully, never all at once, never everything, just enough, always enough. So now there are people who don't know Isaiah's full story, but they know what to do when something feels wrong. They know how to look at the land and see order where others see decay. They know which questions not to ask out loud. They know how to move without leaving a signature. Every generation adds a layer, a new caretaker, a new watcher, a new pair of eyes that understands the difference between history and leverage. That's why the final threat never came from the state. It came from someone who thought they could own the story. A private developer, big money, bigger ego, bought adjacent land and pushed hard, quietly at first. Then louder. He had lawyers, he had permits, he had confidence. What he didn't have was patience. Within weeks, survey stakes vanished, documents leaked. An old burial marker surfaced in a place his blueprint swore was clean. Then another. Then a name tied to a family that still lived nearby. The project stalled. The investor got angry. That's when someone paid him a visit. No threats, no shouting, just a conversation in a parked car, engine off, windows down. They told him three things: where the first body lay, where the second one lay, and where the third one would be found if he kept pushing. He laughed at first. Then they told him the names, not public names, private ones, family ones, the kind you don't get from archives, you get them from memory. He sold the land a month later at a loss, never spoke about it again. People still ask how a single boy could outthink generations of power. They miss the point. Isaiah never played alone. He played long. He understood something older than law, older than money. That the ground keeps records whether you want it to or not. That names don't disappear just because nobody writes them down. That if you teach memory how to move, it learns how to fight back. So if you ever find yourself standing somewhere that feels heavy for no clear reason, if your chest tightens and the air goes quiet, and the land feels like it's waiting, move carefully, because you might be standing on someone's ledger, and the man who built it is still counting. The last thing people misunderstand is silence. They think silence means the story ended. It doesn't. Silence means the system worked. Isaiah didn't leave behind monuments that begged for attention. He left behind pressure points, places where the truth resurfaces when it's pushed too hard, places where power learns to step lightly or bleed quietly. That's why nobody ever officially closed the case. No final report, no clean conclusion, no ribbon-cutting ceremony to seal it up. Because every time someone tried to finish the story, something else surfaced. A name that wasn't supposed to exist. A burial record that didn't match the approved map. A family that showed up with proof nobody could explain away. Loose ends are dangerous, and Isaiah made sure there were always loose ends. Somewhere right now, someone is walking a piece of land they just inherited, wondering why the deed feels heavier than it should. Someone else is opening an old box in an attic and finding a button wrapped in cloth with no explanation except a feeling that it matters. That's the reach. That's how a quiet man keeps moving pieces long after he's gone. Isaiah never wore power. He hid it, distributed it, made it too expensive to destroy. And the people who learned from him learned the most important rule of all. You don't protect memory by announcing it. You protect it by making it unavoidable. So the woods stay wrong. The ground stays restless. And the names keep surfacing when they're least wanted. Because somewhere beneath twisted roots and uneven soil, a boy who learned the game too early still has the board in front of him, still watching, still counting, still making sure no one walks away clean. And if you ever feel like a place remembers more than it should, it probably does, and now that you know this story, so do you. There's a reason nobody ever tries to end it for real. Ending things invites inspection. Inspection invites truth. Truth never shows up alone, so they let it breathe. They let the woods stay quiet and wrong. They let the records surface in pieces, never all at once. They let memory move the way Isaiah designed it to move, sideways, patient, impossible to corner. And every once in a while, someone makes the mistake of thinking enough time has passed. A county official, a developer with fresh permits, a historian chasing prestige instead of truth. They always start the same way. It's just land. It's just history. It's time to move on. That's when the ground answers. A sinkhole opens where no sinkhole should. A foundation cracks along a line that matches an old grave. A family name resurfaces tied to a place that was never supposed to be questioned. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. Because Isaiah never needed chaos, he needed leverage. The people who know the full map don't introduce themselves. They don't wear badges or titles. They sit in meetings and stay quiet. They listen. And when someone crosses the wrong line, they lean in and say just enough to stop the momentum. Not threats, facts. Facts about bodies, facts about names, facts about who remembers what. That's when deals fall apart. That's when voices drop. That's when powerful people suddenly decide something isn't worth the trouble. They never say Isaiah's name. They don't have to, because the real danger was never the boy who dug graves. It was the idea he proved. That memory can be organized. That silence can be strategic. That the dead, when remembered properly, become witnesses. And witnesses change outcomes. So if you ever wonder why certain places never get built on, why some stories keep resurfacing no matter how many times they're buried, why some truths feel heavier the more you try to ignore them, it's because someone like Isaiah touched that ground first, marked it, counted it, protected it. And once a ledger like that exists, the game never really ends. It just waits, watching who moves next. The people who inherited Isaiah's work don't talk about him like a legend. Legends get exaggerated, then dismissed. They talk about him like a standard, like a line you don't cross unless you're ready to lose. Because once you understand what he did, you realize something uncomfortable. He didn't just preserve the past, he shaped the future. Every time a name resurfaces, it forces a decision. A choice between silence and consequence, between profit and exposure, between pretending nothing happened and admitting everything did. That's power, not loud power, not violent power, structural power. the kind that bends outcomes without ever stepping into the light. Somewhere right now, a young person is being shown how to read land the wrong way, how to feel when the ground carries weight, how to remember without writing, how to mark without marking. They won't be told the whole story. They don't need it. They'll be told just enough, because Isaiah understood something that survives every era. You don't need everyone to remember everything. You only need the right people to remember the right parts. That's how systems endure. So the woods remain unsettled. The silence remains deliberate, and the dead remain accounted for even when nobody is counting out loud. And now there's one last thing. Every person who hears this story becomes part of the structure, not as a witness, as a variable, because once you know that memory can be weaponized against erasure, you can't unknow it. You'll feel it the next time a place makes your chest tighten for no clear reason, the next time a story feels incomplete on purpose, the next time someone tells you to forget and calls it progress. You'll remember Isaiah, not as a boy, not as a victim, but as a man who saw the board early and made sure nobody ever played it clean again. And somewhere under crooked trees and tired soil, the ledger stays open, waiting, because the game doesn't end when the story stops. It ends when memory does, and that hasn't happened yet. Nobody ever finds the ledger all at once. That was the rule. If someone did, it would mean the system failed. What they find instead are reminders. A stone where paperwork says there shouldn't be one. A name that keeps reappearing no matter how many times it's removed. A stretch of land that refuses development like it knows what's coming. And every time that happens, someone in power feels it. That moment of hesitation. That tightening in the chest. That instinct to step back without fully understanding why. That's Isaiah, not the man, the method, because Isaiah understood the quiet truth of the game long before anyone called it strategy. You don't protect memory by standing guard over it. You protect it by making it expensive to erase. He left behind no throne, no title, no single heir. He left behind pressure, enough pressure that even now people choose caution over conquest without knowing why. Enough pressure that silence keeps winning arguments words never could. Some nights caretakers still walk the perimeter, not because they're afraid someone will dig, because they're making sure no one forgets where digging leads. They don't carry weapons, they carry names. And names, spoken at the right time, still stop deals cold. So if you ever hear someone say history is over, that the past is buried, that memory doesn't matter anymore, understand this. Somewhere a ledger is still open, somebody is still counting, and the ground is still keeping score. The game never ended. It just learned how to wait.